Billionaire CEO shocked, finding his unconscious ex. With 2 boys crying. His life was never the same. We were waiting for Daddy, but he didn't come. 2 barefoot boys. Trembling hands clutching each other. A mother slumped on a park bench, too still to be asleep. And Nicholas Rivers, billionaire CEO, frozen mid-step, heart thundering, staring into 2 faces that looked exactly like his. He had everything, until this moment. Now, all he had were questions, and 2 little boys calling someone he didn't know he was Daddy. Nicholas Rivers had spent years perfecting the illusion of control. Every morning he walked the same trail through Denver's city park, black coffee in hand, headphones in, pressed suit jacket folded neatly over his forearm to avoid wrinkles. He moved like a man immune to mess, allergic to unpredictability. He liked life this way, predictable, clean, because predictability didn't leave room for regret. Until that morning, a cold mist clung to the trees, the benches, the paths, the world blurred in soft gray. And on one of those benches, a shape. At first he didn't notice, he never did. Joggers, dog walkers, children, none of them were part of his world. But something about that bench stopped him. 2 small boys sat silently, their faces blotchy and red. No shoes, no jackets, just small hands clutching each other. And beside them, a woman, her head slumped, her body limp. Nicholas's pace slowed without his permission. She wasn't asleep. He stepped closer, his chest tightened. And then one of the boys looked up at him. Blue eyes, wild, dark curls, and a face that looked exactly like his. He crouched in front of them, his voice quiet. "Are you okay?" The older twin whispered almost to himself. She just wanted to rest for a little while. The younger added, "We were waiting for Daddy, but he didn't come." Nicholas felt the ground shift under him. He called 911, gave the paramedics her vitals, took off his coat, wrapped it around her body, pulled off his sweater, and tucked it around the boys. And when the EMT asked, "Are you their father?" he didn't lie. "I think I am." He didn't know her name anymore, didn't know if she hated him, didn't know what had happened. But he followed the ambulance anyway. He wasn't thinking about his board meeting. He wasn't thinking about the emails piling up. He was thinking about the woman who had once loved him enough to carry his secrets, and the 2 small boys who had waited for someone who never came. Until now, Chapter 1, The Woman on the Bench. Nicholas had never meant to stop. He wasn't the kind of man who got involved, not in things that didn't concern him. His entire life was built around structure, decisions made 2 quarters ahead, and keeping his hands clean of any mess that couldn't be delegated. Even his morning walks, crisp and timed to the second, were curated to avoid contact with real people. But that morning, something cracked. The woman slumped on the bench didn't just look tired. She looked like she had collapsed under a weight no one had seen. Her hair was tangled, her skin pale, shoulders slack like a puppet with cut strings. And the boys? God, the boys. 2 of them, curled into each other like one heart split in half, no older than 5. Bare feet on the cold pavement, thin clothes clinging to shivering bodies. Their silence was louder than any scream Nicholas had ever heard. When he knelt in front of them, one of the boys lifted his eyes. Blue, too blue, his eyes. "You all right?" Nicholas asked, voice low, steady. They didn't answer right away, just stared, like they knew him, like they were trying to decide if they should trust him. The smaller one leaned into the other, whispering, "She just wanted to rest for a little while." The older added, "We were waiting for Daddy." A pause, but he didn't come. Nicholas couldn't breathe for a second. Because the shape of their faces, the way their dark curls framed their eyes, it was like staring into old photographs of himself. The same stubborn chin, the same quiet sadness. He reached out slowly and touched the woman's shoulder. "Ma'am," he said gently. No response. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck. Her skin was cold, but the pulse was faint. There. Thank God. He reached for his phone, calling emergency services, relaying everything he could. The address, the symptoms, the number of children. He didn't think, he just acted. He shrugged off his coat, wrapped it around her, then pulled off his cashmere sweater and wrapped it around the boys. They didn't flinch. They clung to each other, and to him, as if he'd been there before. As if this wasn't their first time waiting. The hospital smelled like bleach and resignation. Nicholas sat outside the emergency room with a clipboard someone had handed him but never filled out. He didn't even know her name. Not anymore. He hadn't said her name in nearly 6 years. Amber? The name hit him like thunder. Her voice used to be the only sound that could cut through his ambition. Now it echoed through his mind in fragments. Her laugh. Her fire. The way she'd called him out for being too calculated. Too cold. He'd left. Not because she asked him to, but because she didn't. Because she let him go without begging. Now here she was, barely conscious, and 2 boys with eyes like his sitting in a pediatric cot in the next room. A nurse passed by and offered him a soft smile, the kind they gave people who were clearly out of their depth. Nicholas nodded silently, then stood and peeked into the room where the boys lay curled together beneath a too-thin blanket. The younger stirred. "Is she okay?" he asked softly. Nicholas nodded. "She's going to be." I pause. "Are you really our dad?" Nicholas froze. How do you answer that? There were DNA tests, court orders, birth certificates, all the things that would have mattered yesterday. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Only one thing did. "I think I am," he said quietly. The boy nodded once, as if that was enough, then shifted closer, leaning against Nicholas's side. Just for a moment, but it was enough to break something open inside him. Later that afternoon, a doctor emerged from the ER. "She's stable," he said. "Exhaustion, malnutrition, dehydration. She's been under severe stress for a long time." Nicholas didn't speak, just ran a hand over his mouth, trying to keep everything inside from spilling out. "When she wakes," the doctor added, "she'll need someone she trusts." Nicholas wasn't sure he qualified, but he didn't leave. He sat in the hallway, he read picture books in a voice he barely recognized as his own. He held one boy's hand while the other clutched a juice box without ever drinking it. And he didn't answer a single message from the hundreds that buzzed on his phone. His board could wait. His company could wait. Amber couldn't. It was almost evening when a nurse came to find him. "She's awake," she said softly. Room 12. Nicholas stood, palms sweating. He walked slowly, afraid of what he might see, or hear. The door creaked open. Amber lay in the hospital bed, her skin pale against the stark white sheets. But her eyes, those familiar, fierce eyes, met his immediately. "I guess you found us," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I wasn't looking," he replied, "but I'm here." A beat. "You weren't supposed to know." "I know now." She closed her eyes, a breath held, then released. "They don't know who you are," she whispered. "Not really. I didn't tell them. I wasn't sure you'd care." Nicholas stepped closer. "I didn't know if I would," he admitted. Her hand lifted weakly, a soft barrier in the air. "Don't say that. What's done is done." He swallowed. There were 1,000 things he could have said, regrets, apologies, promises, but none of them mattered as much as one question. "What do you need from me?" Amber turned her head toward the window. For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, almost like a prayer, she said, "Don't disappear." Nicholas sat down beside her. "I won't." And for the first time in 6 years, he let his carefully controlled world crumble. Not because he had to, but because 2 small boys were still waiting, and this time he had come. Chapter 2. What she never told me. Nicholas hadn't moved from the hospital chair all night. The hum of machines, the beeping of monitors, the soft rustle of sheets, none of it drowned out the sound in his head. Her voice. Not the one in the hospital bed now, hoarse and thin, but the voice from 6 years ago. Strong, unapologetic, alive. Amber Hayes had been the one person who ever challenged him. She never flinched at his ambition, but she questioned his walls. She'd once said, "You're building an empire, Nicholas, but what if you get to the top and find no one waiting for you there?" He had laughed then, shrugged it off. And then he left her behind. Not with cruelty, not with drama, Just with silence. His company had doubled in size. He'd made his first billion before 40. He'd won. And lost everything. Amber slept deeply, her face half turned to the window where the morning sun spilled in pale and slow. The boys were down the hall, still asleep, one curled around the other like they'd spent their whole lives protecting each other. Maybe they had. He didn't even know their names. That realization made something twist inside him. He had missed it all. First cries, first teeth, first steps. While he was closing deals in Tokyo and shaking hands in Dubai, his sons, were learning the sound of bedtime stories from someone who wasn't him. How could she not tell him? But even as the question burned in his chest, he already knew. Because back then, he wouldn't have stayed. Amber stirred just after 7. Her eyes fluttered open, dry and dazed, then locked on him. "You're still here," she said softly, as if surprised. He nodded. "I said I would be." She shifted slightly, wincing at the IV in her arm. "The boys?" she asked. "They're okay, sleeping. They asked if I was their dad." Amber's breath caught. Nicholas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her answer didn't come right away. She stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly. "You were already gone," she said finally, "and I didn't have it in me to beg someone to love us." "You wouldn't have had to beg," he replied, more quickly than he meant to. She looked at him then, really looked. "No? You wouldn't have disappeared the first time a meeting got in the way of a birthday? A crying baby ruined your sleep before a board vote?" He didn't answer. Because the truth was, he would have. Back then, he wasn't built for this. Amber turned her head away, eyes on the window. "I didn't tell you," she said, "because I didn't want to raise children with someone who thought their love was optional." Nicholas swallowed, hard. She wasn't being cruel, she was just telling the truth. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to argue, but instead he asked, "What are their names?" "Elijah and Jacob," she said quietly. "Elijah's the older one. He doesn't talk much when he's scared. Jacob's the loud one, laughs at everything, until he doesn't." Nicholas nodded, repeating the names silently. Elijah, Jacob. His sons. Later that day, Nicholas sat in the hospital playroom with them, picture books stacked beside him, juice boxes unopened. Jacob tugged on the sleeve of his blazer. "Do you live here now?" he asked. "No," Nicholas said gently, "just visiting." "Why?" Elijah asked. "You gave us your sweater." "I wanted you to be warm." Jacob tilted his head. "So, you like us?" Nicholas smiled. "Very much." The boys looked at each other, then back at him. No more questions, just quiet acceptance. That night, Amber whispered something that stayed with him. She was sitting up in bed, her strength returning, hands folded in her lap. "I watched your company from afar," she said. "You were everywhere. Forbes, TechVision, the man who built everything alone." He didn't respond. She looked up, tears barely there. "I wasn't angry, Nicholas. I was just tired. I had 2 babies, no help, no sleep, sometimes no food." Nicholas closed his eyes. She didn't need his guilt, she needed something more solid. "I want to help now," he said. "Really help." Amber didn't answer. But for the first time, she didn't push him away. Before he left that night, Nicholas tucked the boys into their hospital cot. Elijah stirred and looked up at him sleepily. "You can come back tomorrow," he said. It wasn't a question, it was permission. Nicholas's voice cracked as he whispered back. He was a boy, tiny trees and mismatched socks. Nicholas showed up the next morning before the sun fully cleared the horizon. No coffee, no suit, just jeans and an old gray sweater that looked out of place on a man who used to win awards for how crisply he dressed. He stood at the threshold of the pediatric wing with 2 paper bags, one filled with warm pancakes he'd bought from a street vendor, the other with new socks, still with tags. He hadn't known what size to get, he'd just bought every color. When he opened the door to the boys' room, Jacob sat up immediately, hair wild, eyes wide. "You came back," he said. Nicholas smiled softly. "I told you I would." Elijah didn't speak. He simply rolled onto his side and made room on the cot. They ate in silence at first, Syrup dripped onto plastic trays. Jacob licked his fingers. Elijah nibbled slowly, eyes never leaving Nicholas. "These are better than the crackers," Jacob announced. Nicholas nodded. "I hoped they would be." Jacob dug through the second bag, pulling out socks one by one. "Whoa, dinosaurs!" "And pizza ones. And are these donuts?" He held them up like trophies. Nicholas chuckled. "I wasn't sure what you liked." Jacob grinned. "We like everything, except vegetables. Especially not broccoli," Elijah added, voice small. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. "Even if I call them tiny trees?" Elijah paused. "Maybe." It was small, but it was the first time he smiled. That afternoon, Nicholas helped the boys build a tower out of tongue depressors and gauze. It collapsed 3 times. Jacob howled with laughter every time. Elijah pretended not to care, but kept placing each piece with surgical focus. Amber watched from the doorway. Her hair was still tangled, she hadn't put on makeup, but Nicholas thought she looked stronger. He stood as she entered. "You don't have to stay," she said, crossing her arms. "I know. You've already done more than I expected." He met her eyes. "I'm not here out of guilt, Amber." She studied him for a moment, then sat in the corner chair, her body folding gently into the cushion. "You always liked fixing things," she murmured. "You just never stayed long enough to hold them when they broke again." He didn't argue, because she wasn't wrong. That evening, the nurse handed Nicholas 2 child-sized toothbrushes and pointed to the tiny shared sink. The boy stood beside him, giggling through foam. "Too much toothpaste," Elijah declared. "It's never too much," Jacob insisted, bubbles spilling down his chin. Nicholas helped rinse them off, dried their hands, and tucked them into bed. The cot was barely wide enough for one, but they didn't seem to mind. As he pulled the thin blanket up to their chins, Elijah reached out and touched his wrist. "Are you really our dad?" Nicholas paused. The room was quiet, just the soft beep of monitors from down the hall. The scent of hospital soap and faint syrup clung to the air. "Think I am," he whispered. Jacob yawned. "Do dads come back every day?" "They should," Nicholas replied. Elijah whispered, "Okay," and closed his eyes. He stepped into the hallway, heart thudding against his ribs like it was trying to punch through the cage of his chest. Amber stood there, watching. "They never ask questions like that," she said. "Not to strangers." Nicholas looked at her, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I don't want to be a stranger anymore." Amber didn't answer, but she didn't look away. That night, Nicholas sat in his car and stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He didn't look like the CEO of R&R Tech. He looked like a man who had just held something fragile for the first time and didn't want to let go. He texted Maria, his assistant. "Cancel the London trip. Indefinitely." She replied with a single line. "I was hoping you'd say that." Chapter 4. The room they made for me. Nicholas returned the next morning, with a pillow tucked under one arm. He didn't know why. Maybe because the hospital couch was wrecking his spine. Maybe because the nurse said the boys had nightmares. Maybe because something in his chest tightened every time he drove away at night. So he didn't. He stayed. Amber didn't say a word when she saw the pillow. Bill just nodded, barely, and shifted to make space in the corner of the boys' hospital room. The cot had been replaced by 2 rollaway beds pushed together. Elijah insisted on sleeping closest to the wall. Jacob insisted on bringing his entire juice box collection with him. Nicholas didn't try to fix any of it. He just helped them stack the straws and tuck them in, one by one. That first night, Jacob fell asleep mid-sentence. Elijah stayed awake longer, watching Nicholas from across the room. Nicholas stayed in the recliner, hands folded, lights dimmed. "You look different in this light," Elijah whispered. Nicholas blinked. "How do I look?" "Not like the men Mom avoids." The words were too old for his age. Too sharp. Too sad. Nicholas sat forward, slowly. "Do you want me to leave?" Elijah shook his head. "I just wanted to know if you'll still be here in the morning." Nicholas whispered back, "Yes." And when Elijah finally slept, he whispered something into the dark. "Okay." The next day, Nicholas found a short-term rental 3 blocks from the hospital. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, big windows, a working heater. He had his assistant, Maria, sign the lease and stock the fridge. He didn't ask Amber's permission. But he didn't assume either. He just brought her the keys and said, "It's closer, warmer, safer." She stared at the envelope in her hand. "And what do you expect in return?" she asked. "Nothing." He paused. "No, that's not true. I want to be near them." "That's not true. I want to be near them." Amber hesitated, then whispered, "Okay." The apartment wasn't perfect. The heater made clicking sounds in the night. The cabinets creaked. There were no paintings on the walls. But the boys didn't care. They danced barefoot across the wooden floors and raced to pick which bed would be theirs. "I call this one," Jacob yelled, diving onto the left mattress. Elijah eyed the other. "Only if I get the wall side again." Nicholas laughed. "Dio." Amber stood in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug, her voice barely above the hum of the refrigerator. They've never had their own room before. Nicholas turned to her gently, "And let's give them a reason to remember it." That weekend, he brought over a soft rug, nightlights shaped like stars, and a small bookshelf filled with every picture book he could find. Amber found him late one night in the boys' room, sitting cross-legged in a sea of crayon wrappers and stickers. "You building a library?" she asked. "I'm building a memory," he said. She didn't laugh, but her mouth softened into something that almost looked like forgiveness. By the end of the week, everything had shifted. The boys ran to him when he walked through the door. Elijah started asking him to help with puzzles. Jacob insisted Nicholas try his spaghetti recipe, which involved no noodles and mostly ketchup. One night, Nicholas arrived late from a conference call. He couldn't move. He opened the apartment door, guilt crawling up his back. But before he could say a word, both boys barreled into him. "Where were you?" Jacob demanded. "We saved you dinner," Elijah added. Nicholas dropped to one knee. "I'm sorry." The boys hugged him anyway. And in that moment, he didn't feel like a guest. He felt like theirs. Amber saw it too. She stood beside him in the kitchen as the boys watched cartoons, their laughter echoing down the hall. "They like you," she said. He glanced at her. "They don't even really know me." She sipped her tea. "Kids don't fall in love with resumes, Nicholas. They know who's real, and they're drawn to you, like they just knew." Nicholas stared into his mug, his voice low. "And scared of messing this up?" Amber smiled softly. "Good." He looked up, startled. "That means you care enough to try." That night, Nicholas sat on the floor between the 2 beds as the boys drifted to sleep. The room smelled like fabric softener and crayons. Elijah's hand found his in the dark. Jacob mumbled something about dinosaurs. Nicholas didn't move. He just sat there, holding their warmth in his hand, and realized this was the room they had made for him. Not with furniture, but with trust. What if the place you belonged to wasn't a boardroom or a penthouse, but a room filled with stickers, mismatched socks, and 2 small voices whispering, "Stay." Chapter 5. The Man Who Came Back Too Late. The days had begun to blend into something steady. A kind of quiet rhythm Nicholas had never known before. Cereal spills, bedtime songs, Elijah's serious questions, Jacob's wild laughter. Amber had started drawing again. Nothing grand, just sketches on napkins and the backs of grocery lists. Nicholas didn't ask what she was sketching. He just let her be. He was learning that love wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent, watching from the kitchen doorway as 2 boys brushed their teeth in harmony, one of them humming a superhero theme. Then one morning, the phone rang. His phone. A name on the screen that shouldn't have meant anything to him, but it did. Colin Brandt, Amber's ex. Nicholas didn't answer. But the next call came from his attorney. And this one, he took. "Colin has filed for visitation," the voice on the other end said. Nicholas didn't speak. Again, claims he's been a father figure to the boys, that he provided for them, loved them, and now he wants legal rights. Nicholas stared out the window. The boys were in the yard, kicking a half-deflated ball between them. They've never even said his name. I know, the lawyer said gently. But we'll need evidence, statements, anything that proves he wasn't there. Nicholas clenched his jaw. He had spent his life preparing for hostile takeovers, contract breaches, billion-dollar acquisitions. But this was personal. He didn't tell Amber right away. She was still recovering, physically, yes, but more than that. She'd only just started smiling again. A quiet smile, barely there. The kind that came when Elijah offered her a flower he found in the cracks of the sidewalk. Nicholas didn't want to take that from her. So he waited, built a case quietly, collected timelines, asked his assistant to find medical records, landlord statements, anything that showed Amber had been alone, truly alone. And all the while, he stayed present. He read the bedtime stories. He made pancakes that always burned. He showed up, even when he was exhausted, even when he was scared. Then one night, Amber walked into the kitchen and found a letter on the table. Legal notice. Colin's attorney's name in bold at the top. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, holding the paper like it was made of fire. Nicholas watched her face go still, not surprised, just tired. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I wanted to protect you from this. From him." Amber nodded. Her eyes stayed on the floor. "Elena wants control," she whispered. "He doesn't want them. He never did." Nicholas's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Then we show them the truth," he said. "What the boys know, what you know." Amber finally looked up. "Do you really want to do this, Nicholas?" He stepped forward. "There's nothing I want more." The boys sensed the shift in the house. Jacob became clingy, asking more questions. "Why is Mommy sad again?" "Are we moving?" echoed. "Is someone else coming?" Elijah stayed quiet, but Nicholas noticed the way he lingered longer at bedtime, the way he checked the lock on the front door, twice. Then one night, Jacob asked, "Are you still our dad if someone else wants to be?" Nicholas knelt to meet his eyes. "There is no someone else," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm yours, no matter what anyone says." Jacob didn't reply. But that night, Nicholas found a drawing slipped under his pillow. 3 stick figures. Labeled, "Me, Eli, Dad." The court date arrived quicker than expected. Nicholas wore a plain gray suit, no tie. He didn't want to look like a CEO. He wanted to look like a man who had earned something money couldn't buy. Amber sat beside him. Her hand brushed his beneath the table. She didn't speak, but he felt it. Her trust. Not loud, but real. Colin arrived late, wearing designer shoes and entitlement-like cologne. His lawyer gave a polished opening statement about intentions, attachment, and a man's right to remain in a child's life. But when the judge asked Colin about Elijah's birthday, he didn't know it. When asked what Jacob wanted to be when he grew up, he guessed, a football player. The silence that followed was damning. Then the judge asked, have the children expressed any preferences? A court-appointed advocate stood. "Yes, Your Honor, I met with both boys privately." She opened her notebook. Elijah said, "Nick reads to us, even when he's tired. He makes pancakes, even when they burn." Pause. Jacob said, "He came for us. That's how we know he's our dad." Amber looked down, swallowing tears. Nicholas didn't cry, but something broke open in his chest. Not pain, permanence. The judge ruled in their favor. Petition denied. Nicholas was granted full legal guardianship as the children's biological father. No dramatic gavel slam, no applause. Just a quiet line spoken by a woman in robes. Let the record show, Mr. Rivers has demonstrated the actions of a father, and that is what matters. Back at the apartment, the boys celebrated in the only way they knew how. Blanket fort, stuffed animals, popcorn and bowls too big for their hands. They dragged Nicholas inside, nestled under covers, Jacob whispering, "We're safe now." And Nicholas believed him. Not because the court said so, but because this time he had stayed. What if the battle you feared most became the proof of the love you never thought you could give? Chapter 6. He came for us. The days that followed the court hearing were quiet. Not empty, just peaceful. No one said the word victory. There were no speeches, no celebrations. But there was something better. There was breakfast with giggles instead of tension. There were footsteps that didn't tiptoe. There were nights when both boys fell asleep mid-story, their heads resting on Nicholas's chest, their breaths deep and even. The home had changed. Not its walls, not its size, but its weight. It no longer felt like they were waiting for someone to come through the door. He was already there. Nicholas found himself waking earlier than usual, not because of alarms or schedules, but because he wanted to. He liked hearing the house before it fully woke up. The sound of Amber stirring tea in the kitchen. The shuffle of small socks against hallway wood. He made breakfast clumsily. Always too many eggs, too little toast. But the boys didn't mind. "I like it when it's messy," Jacob said once, maple syrup dripping from his chin. Nicholas smiled. "Me too." Amber had started smiling. Not the polite kind, not the strained kind, but the real ones, the kind that crinkled the corners of her eyes when Jacob tried to fold laundry and accidentally wore a pair of underwear as a hat. Nicholas caught her watching him one evening while he read to the boys. After they fell asleep, she didn't look away when he stood in the hallway. "They're softer now," she said. Nicholas tilted his head. She shook her head. "You." He didn't answer. But that night, he found himself whispering thank you to the silence, to the ceiling, to whatever had placed him in that park on that particular morning. One rainy afternoon, Jacob asked to draw a picture. He dragged crayons and paper to the living room floor. When he was done, he called for Nicholas. "Come see." It was a messy sketch. Stick figures, lopsided heads, crooked hearts. But what Nicholas saw froze him. 4 figures. Labeled underneath, me, Eli, Mom, Dad. And above it, in bright red crayon, "He made it here, came for us." That night, Nicholas placed the drawing on his nightstand. He didn't sleep much. Not because he was restless, but because his chest felt too full. He had spent years chasing things. Funding rounds, press features, influence. And now, none of that mattered. This picture, drawn in wobbly lines by a 5-year-old, had more worth than any award he'd ever received. Amber walked in just after midnight. She saw the picture and smiled. They used to draw just the two of them. Every time. Just each other. Nicholas turned to her. "And now? They draw you." She looked at him then. Not guarded, not testing. Just honest. "You didn't just win them over," she said. "You made them believe love shows up." Nicholas swallowed. "I'm trying." Amber stepped closer. "You don't have to try so hard, Nicholas." A pause. They said, "They already know." Later, when the house was quiet again, he walked to the boys' room and knelt beside their beds. He didn't need to check on them. He just needed to see them. Elijah stirred, eyes opening halfway. "Are you okay?" he mumbled. Nicholas smiled. "Better than I've ever been." Elijah reached out, barely awake, and touched his arm. "You came for us." Nicholas nodded, eyes stinging. "I always will." What if the greatest proof of love wasn't in what you gave, but in the fact that you stayed when staying was hardest? Chapter 7. A Home Made of Noise. The new house wasn't big, not compared to what Nicholas could afford, not compared to his penthouse with its rooftop views and elevator sexus wine cellar, but it had a backyard, a swing set Elijah and Jacob could race toward barefoot, and a sunroom where Amber could paint with the light on her shoulders, and walls, bare at first, but alive now with fingerprints, taped up drawings and laughter that didn't feel borrowed. Nicholas signed the lease without a second thought. Through her 3 bedrooms, a creaky porch, a faucet that dripped when no one touched it, and space to become there. The day they moved in, it rained. Hard. Boxes soaked through, pillows drooped in puddles. Jacob cried because his socks were wet, and Elijah tried to comfort him with a sticky lollipop that only made things worse. Nicholas stood in the middle of it all, drenched, shivering, holding a half-assembled bunk bed instruction manual, and smiled. Because for once, chaos didn't scare him. It grounded him. Amber found him in the hallway an hour later, surrounded by mismatched dining chairs and a mountain of unpacked toys. "You look like a man defeated," she teased. Nicholas shook his head. This is what victory looks like." That night they had pizza on the floor. No plates, just paper towels and juice boxes. Jacob announced, "Mead bite, this is the best dinner ever." Elijah added, "Because we're all together." Nicholas looked at Amber across the sea of boxes and crusts. She mouthed, "Thank you." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The next morning, Nicholas was the first one up. He made pancakes again, still burned, still uneven, still devoured. Then he sat on the porch steps, coffee cooling in his hands, and watched the sun climb through the trees. A small moment, but it made him feel like a man who hadn't missed everything, just enough to know he'd never take these mornings for granted again. Amber painted more now. Nicholas had turned the sunroom into a studio. He hung shelves, bought her easels, set up a small speaker that played soft jazz. He never asked what she painted, but sometimes, when he passed by and she didn't see him, he'd peek in. One canvas held the image of a man holding two boys' hands, walking away from the viewer into the light. He didn't say a word, just closed the door gently behind him. One Saturday, after the boys ran wild in the backyard chasing soap bubbles, Nicholas sat on the porch swing with Elijah. They watched Jacob dig holes in the dirt with a spoon. "Says he's building a secret cave," Elijah reported seriously. Nicholas smiled. "Should we be worried?" Elijah shrugged. "Only if he finds treasure." A pause. "Then, we like it here." Nicholas turned to him. "You do?" Elijah nodded. The other places were quiet. Too quiet. But here, he looked around. "Here it sounds like people who love each other live here." Nicholas blinked, chest full. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's exactly what it sounds like." That night, Jacob couldn't sleep. He knocked on Nicholas's door, pajamas inside out, holding a stuffed bear by its leg. "I'm scared," he whispered. Nicholas pulled back the blanket. Jacob crawled in. "What are you scared of?" Nicholas asked. Jacob buried his face into his chest. Who would have guessed it was going down from 8? Nicholas tightened his arms around him. "It won't." Jacob didn't speak again. Your voice just sighed. And for the first time since Nicholas had met them, Jacob fell asleep in someone else's arms, without needing to be held there first. The next morning, Nicholas found a sticky note on the fridge. Written in black letters, "Dad, can we build a treehouse?" Jacob, and Eli says yes too. Nicholas read it 3 times, then taped it to the fridge. Not because he needed the reminder, but because some requests were sacred. What if love wasn't measured in square footage or titles, but in laughter echoing through a hallway you never thought you'd call home? Chapter 8. The jacket with the corduroy collar. The first cold snap came early. Amber was the first to notice. She pulled the heavier blankets out from the closet. She layered the boys' beds with quilts donated by a neighbor. She pulled out her old coat. Frayed, olive green, one pocket stitched with mismatched thread. Nicholas didn't notice the temperature until his fingers went numb on the treehouse ladder. Jacob was shouting directions from above. Elijah handed up nails like a surgeon passing tools. "Dad, it's crooked." Nicholas laughed. "That's because your blueprints were drawn in crayon." Jacob beamed. "Best plans ever." The wind picked up, biting through his sleeves. He shivered, but he didn't stop. The season, because he'd missed too many seasons before this. That night, Amber knocked on his door. She didn't wait for him to answer. She walked in, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Nicholas asked. Amber looked away. "Just open it." He peeled the tape slowly, careful not to tear it. Inside was a jacket. Charcoal gray, sturdy, a little worn at the cuffs. And the collar, corduroy. He froze. He knew this jacket. 6 years ago, Amber had given it to him the night before his biggest investor pitch. She'd bought it from a thrift shop. Told him the collar made him look a little less perfect. He never wore it. Too casual, he'd said. Too ordinary. Now it felt like a gift from another life. Nicholas ran a hand over the fabric. "You kept it?" Amber shrugged. "Didn't mean to." Nikolai looked at her. "You're giving it back?" "No," she said. "I'm giving it to you." A pause. "Because the man I gave it to back then? He didn't deserve it." Her voice softened. "But you do." Later, Nicholas stood in the hallway, the jacket folded over his arm. The boys were asleep. Amber was curled on the couch, sketchbook on her lap, pencil in hand. He didn't say anything. Just draped the jacket across the back of her chair and gently placed his hand over hers. She looked up, and for a moment, just one, she let her head fall against his shoulder. Neither of them moved, not because they were afraid to, but because they didn't need to. The next morning, Nicholas wore the jacket. Elijah noticed first. "That's different," he said. Jacob pointed to the collar. "Looks like corduroy." Nicholas nodded. "It is." Amber looked up from the stove and smiled. That afternoon, they walked to the park together. All four of them. No security, no schedules, no plan. Jacob chased pigeons. Elijah collected red leaves in his pockets. Amber took photos, the cheap, disposable kind. "Because this," she said, "is what we'll want to remember." Nicholas stood beside her, hands in the jacket pockets, watching the boys spin in circles until they fell laughing into the grass. He hadn't felt this warm in years. That evening, Elijah crawled into Nicholas's lap with a book in hand. Not a picture book. One with real pages. "You sure?" Nicholas asked. "I want to read with you," Elijah said, "not just listen." They read slowly. Nicholas stumbled on a few words. Elijah corrected him with a proud smile. Amber passed by the doorway and froze. Because for a moment, it looked like a real father and son. And for the first time, it didn't feel like pretending. When Nicholas went to bed that night, he hung the jacket on the back of his chair. Carefully, like something sacred, he traced the stitching of the collar with his thumb. Not because it was perfect, but because it reminded him of who he used to be and how far he'd come. What if the most meaningful gifts weren't diamonds or gestures, but something simple you once rejected and finally became worthy of? Chapter 9. Pumpkin Dashes and Bedtime Tears. The flyer came home crumpled and glitter-stained, folded into Jacob's backpack between a half-eaten granola bar and a drawing of a T-Rex eating spaghetti. Fall Festival, Saturday at Lincoln Elementary. Pumpkin painting. Costume contest, the Pumpkin Dad Dash. Nicholas held the paper like it was a foreign object. "What exactly is the Pumpkin Dad Dash?" he asked. Jacob's face lit up. "You run across the field with a pumpkin on your head." Elijah added, deadpan, "It's the most important race of the year." Amber smirked from the kitchen. "Better start training." Saturday arrived, cold and clear. Nicholas stood in the elementary school parking lot wearing a full-body pumpkin costume that was clearly not built for a 6'2" man. The hat wobbled. The boys laughed so hard Jacob nearly fell over. "You look like a squished fruit," Elijah declared. Nicholas groaned. "Is this payback for the treehouse nails?" But he didn't complain. He ran the race. Badly. The pumpkin hat fell off twice. He collided with another dad and rolled down the hill. The boys howled with joy. Amber laughed so hard she cried. And Nicholas? He couldn't stop smiling. Not because he won, but because he was there. After the race, they walked hand in hand through rows of booths. Cotton candy, apple cider, face painting. The boys had their cheeks painted with matching lightning bolts. "Like twins," Jacob said proudly. "You are twins," Elijah replied. Jacob shrugged. But now people can tell. Nicholas bought them caramel apples that immediately stuck to their fingers and stained their sleeves. He didn't mind. He handed out napkins like medals, kissed sticky foreheads, and took 100 blurry photos with a disposable camera. They weren't perfect pictures, but they were the kind that mattered. That night, after the boys were in bed and the house was finally quiet, Nicholas and Amber sat on the porch. A blanket draped over both their shoulders, the scent of autumn clinging to their skin. Amber leaned her head gently on his. "You looked ridiculous today," she whispered. He laughed. "I know. I loved it, she said. So did he, but he didn't say it. He just looked at her, really looked, and realized something simple. He didn't want to leave this moment. Ever. Inside, Jacob cried out in his sleep. Nicholas was up instantly, crossing the room with bare feet and breath held. He found him tangled in sheets, face wet with tears. Hey, hey, he whispered, pulling him close. Jacob clung to him, sobbing. I thought you were gone. Nicholas rocked him slowly, heart breaking and mending all at once. I'm not, he said. I'm right here. I had a dream someone took us away again. No one's taking you. Ever. Jacob's breath slowed. You promise? Nicholas pressed his forehead to his son's. With everything I am. Amber stood quietly in the hallway, watching. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to, because that moment spoke louder than anything he could have said to her. Later, Nicholas sat in the boys' room long after they had drifted back to sleep. He watched the rise and fall of their chests, the small hands curled into fists beneath their pillows. He used to measure value in profit. Now he measured it in these seconds. The quiet ones, the sacred ones. The ones where nothing dramatic happened, except everything. When he finally returned to the porch, Amber hadn't moved. She handed him a warm mug of tea. Bedtime tears? Nicholas nodded. The worst kind. Amber studied him for a long moment. You really love them? His voice broke. I don't know how I ever live without them. Amber reached out, her fingers brushing his. Neither do they. They sat like that for a long time. No words, just breathing in sync, hearts full in the silence between them. And for the first time, Nicholas didn't wonder if he was doing enough. Because he finally felt it, deep and certain. He was theirs, and they were his. What if love wasn't about how high you climbed, but how low you were willing to kneel when someone needed you most? This is home. The snow came early that year. Thick, quiet flakes fell like whispers from the sky, covering the world in a hush that made everything feel softer. Nicholas stood at the window in his flannel pajama pants, coffee in one hand, watching the boys build something unidentifiable in the yard. It's a dragon castle, Jacob had explained. Elijah added, but it has to survive snowball attacks. Nicholas had just nodded, naturally. Behind him, the house breathed gently. Heater clicking, kettle singing, Amber's footsteps padding across the kitchen floor. It was the kind of morning no one would remember. But Nicholas would never forget. They had lived in the house for nearly 2 months. Long enough for it to become worn in, shoes piled by the door, school forms magneted to the fridge, finger-painted handprints on the hallway wall that no one bothered to clean. Amber had set up a full art studio in the sunroom. Nicholas had stopped going to his old penthouse completely. His former life still existed, in theory. His name still sat on boards, his email still pinged. But every day he chose this. The treehouse, the couch fort, the grocery runs where Jacob picked cereal based solely on which one had the best prize. And he didn't miss a single second of what he left behind. That evening, Elijah brought him a drawing. Nicholas unfolded the paper carefully. 4 figures, holding hands, a house with crooked windows, a heart above the roof, and in bold, uneven letters across the top. This is home. Nicholas didn't say anything. He just reached for Elijah and pulled him into a hug so tight, the boy giggled into his chest. Later that night, after bedtime and baths, after the dishes were done and Amber lit a cinnamon candle just because, it happened. Nicholas stood in the hallway brushing his teeth when Amber appeared behind him. She didn't speak. She just leaned against the doorframe, watching him in the mirror. Then, subtly, you've changed. He turned, mouth full of toothpaste, trying to reply. She laughed, covered her mouth. Finish brushing, weirdo. When he was done, he found her waiting in the living room, lights low, boys asleep. She patted the space beside her on the couch. He sat, and for a long time, neither of them said a word. Then she whispered, You didn't change because you had to, did you? Nicholas shook his head. No, he said, I changed because I finally had something worth staying for. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the fire crackled. And for the first time in years, Nicholas felt still. Not restless, not lonely, just whole. The next morning he woke before anyone else. The boys were tangled in blankets. Amber was curled on her side, hand resting above her head. Nicholas moved slowly through the kitchen, making pancakes again. Burnt, as usual. This time on purpose. Jacob liked him that way. When everyone was awake, Elijah announced that today was Family Picture Day, even though no one had planned it. Amber pulled out the old Polaroid camera. They stood by the treehouse, arms wrapped around each other. Jacob made a funny face. Elijah tried to fix his hair at the last second. Amber clicked the button. The photo developed slowly, colors bleeding into shape. Nicholas took it and placed it on the mantel, right next to the boys' crayon drawing. He looked at it, then at them, then at Amber, and said, softly, "We're not waiting anymore." She reached for his hand. "No," she whispered, "we're home." What if the life you always wanted wasn't something you chased, but something you were brave enough to stay still long enough to build? If this story touched you, some people say love comes when you're ready. Others say it comes when you least expect it. But sometimes, it comes when you're standing in the cold, holding your breath, in front of two small strangers with eyes that look like your own. Nicholas Rivers thought he had everything. A name in magazines, a skyline view, a silent home. But he didn't know the sound of his child's laugh. He didn't know the feeling of small hands reaching for his. He didn't know what it meant to stay, not until he nearly walked past the thing he was meant to find. He never got a second chance at love. He got the first real one. Because love, when it's true, doesn't arrive with fanfare. It shows up barefoot, in tears, on a park bench. And it whispers, "Please don't disappear." Nicholas stayed. Not because he had to, but because he finally understood. Being a father isn't something you earn in court. It's something you prove every morning, burnt pancakes and all. Amber didn't need a hero. She needed someone who showed up, quietly, and the boys didn't need a perfect dad. They just needed him. Not the man he used to be, but the man he became, one bedtime story at a time. So if this story touched something in you, if you've ever waited on a bench, or hoped someone would choose to stay, then maybe the next story is yours. See you there.